Celeste Winters stood before the ornate mirror in the bridal suite, her reflection showing a stranger draped in ivory silk. At 21, she should have been excited about her wedding day, but instead, her stomach churned with dread. The antique, lace veil that had belonged to her grandmother felt heavy as chains, weighing down her auburn curls and dimming the light in her emerald eyes. "You look beautiful, miss," whispered the wedding coordinator, adjusting the train of Celeste's designer gown. But Celeste barely heard her. All she could think about was the mountain of gambling debts her late father had left behind, and how her stepmother had sold her like cattle to the highest bidder to save their family home. Vincent Blackwood waited at the altar of the prestigious St. Margaret's Cathedral, his tall frame imposing in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. At 34, he commanded respect in every boardroom in the city, his tech empire built from nothing through sheer determination and ruthless intelligence. His dark hair was swept back from angular features that women found devastatingly handsome, though his steel-gray eyes held no warmth as he watched his bride approach. The ceremony passed in a blur of meaningless words and hollow promises. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent's kiss was brief and perfunctory, his lips cold against hers. Celeste felt like she was drowning in plain sight, surrounded by hundreds of guests who saw only a fairy tale wedding, not the transaction it truly was. The reception at the Blackwood estate was a display of wealth that made Celeste dizzy. Crystal. Chandeliers cast rainbows across marble floors, and servers in white gloves offered champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's monthly rent. Vincent moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his hand occasionally touching the small of her back in what appeared to be affectionate gestures, but felt utterly impersonal. "Mrs. Blackwood," guests congratulated her. And each time the name felt like wearing someone else's clothes. Celeste smiled until her cheeks ached, played the happy bride, while inside she felt herself disappearing piece by piece. As the evening wound down, Vincent drove them to his penthouse in silence, the city lights blurring past the windows of his black Ferrari. The apartment was a monument to modern architecture and expensive taste, all clean lines and neutral colors that felt as warm as a museum after closing time. "Your room is down the hall," Vincent said without looking at her, loosening his tie with sharp, efficient movements. "Mrs. Henderson, my housekeeper, has prepared everything you'll need." Celeste stared at him, wounded by the casual dismissal. "Separate rooms? I thought you'd prefer privacy while you adjust," he replied, his tone carefully neutral. Then he disappeared into what she assumed was his own bedroom, leaving her standing alone in the vast living room, still wearing her wedding dress-like armor she no longer needed. That night, Celeste sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows, still in her gown, watching the city sleep below. She was married to one of the most powerful men in the country, living in luxury most could only dream of, yet she had never felt more alone in her life. Part 2. Shadows of the Past. Vincent Blackwood stood in his home office at 3 in the morning, a tumbler of whiskey untouched in his hand, as he stared at the photograph on his desk. Emma's radiant smile seemed to mock him from beyond the grave, her blue eyes sparkling with the joy he'd stolen from the world the night she died. Mrs. Helena Cross, his housekeeper of 15 years, knocked softly before entering. The silver-haired woman had been more mother than employee since his own parents died, and she was the only person brave enough to confront him about his demons. "She's crying again," Helena said quietly, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "That poor girl doesn't understand why her own husband can't bear to look at her." Vincent's jaw tightened. "It's better this way." For who? Certainly not for her, and definitely not for you. Helena's kind eyes held no judgment, only concern. "Emma wouldn't want this, Vincent. She'd be heartbroken to see what you've done to yourself." The mention of Emma's name was like a knife twisting in his chest. 3 years had passed since the accident, but the guilt remained as fresh as an open wound. He'd been driving that night, angry about a business deal gone wrong, distracted by his phone. The truck had come out of nowhere, boning their car on Emma's side. She died instantly while he walked away without a scratch. "Emma was supposed to be my wife," Vincent said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We were going to have children, grow old together. Instead, I killed her and married a stranger to produce an heir for the company board. How is that not betrayal?" Helena sighed, her weathered hands folding in her lap. "You didn't kill her, Vincent. It was an accident, a terrible twist of fate that no one could have prevented. And as for Celeste, you may have married her for business reasons, but I've seen how you look at her when you think no one's watching." Vincent's head snapped up. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're attracted to her, maybe even beginning to care for her, and it terrifies you because it feels like letting go of Emma." Helena stood, smoothing her apron with gentle efficiency. "But love isn't finite, dear boy. Loving someone new doesn't diminish what you had before." After Helena left, Vincent found himself walking to Celeste's room, stopping outside her door like a ghost haunting his own home. He could hear her moving around inside, probably unable to sleep just as he was. His hand raised to knock, then fell back to his side. The next morning, he watched from his office window as Celeste explored the estate gardens, her long auburn hair catching the sunlight as she bent to examine the rose bushes Emma had planted. The sight of her in Emma's favorite spot should have felt like sacrilege, but instead it stirred something protective and tender in his chest. When Celeste discovered Emma's studio in the East Wing, Vincent found her there hours later, standing, before the easel that still held Emma's final painting. Tears streamed down Celeste's face as she studied the unfinished portrait of a sunset over the ocean. "She was talented," Celeste said, without turning around, her voice thick with emotion. "And she was beautiful. No wonder you can't stand the sight of me." Vincent's throat constricted. "Celeste, that's not—" "It's okay," she said, finally facing him with eyes that held too much understanding for someone so young. "I know what I am to you. A poor substitute for the woman you really loved. I just wish you'd told me about her, instead of letting me wonder what I'd done wrong." As she walked past him toward the door, Vincent caught her arm gently. For a moment, they stood frozen, the first real touch they'd shared since their wedding day. Her skin was warm and soft, and he could smell her vanilla perfume mixed with the lingering scent of Emma's paint supplies. "You haven't done anything wrong," he said hoarsely. "The fault is mine, all of it." Celeste had endured 3 months of polite distance and careful choreographed avoidance before she reached her limit. The morning she found the divorce papers in Vincent's desk drawer while looking for a pen, she knew she couldn't continue living as a ghost in her own marriage. Marcus Reed, Vincent's business partner and closest friend, found her packing in the garden pavilion that afternoon. The sandy-haired man with gentle brown eyes had been one of the few wedding guests who'd actually tried to make conversation with her, and over the past weeks, he'd become her only real companion in the lonely estate. "Planning a trip?" Marcus asked, settling beside her on the stone bench where she'd been folding clothes into a small suitcase. "Planning an escape," Celeste replied, not bothering to hide the bitterness in her voice. "Did you know your best friend has already prepared divorce papers? I'm apparently more dispensable than I thought." Marcus's expression darkened. "He's an idiot. He's a grieving widower who should never have been forced into this marriage." Celeste's voice cracked despite her efforts to stay strong. "I can't keep pretending this is normal, Marcus. I can't keep living with a man who flinches every time I enter a room." "Where will you go?" Celeste shrugged, trying for nonchalance she didn't feel. "I have a cousin in Seattle. She said I could stay with her while I figure things out. Maybe go back to school, finish my art degree." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching her hands shake as she folded a sweater. "He loves you, you know. Words hit her like a physical blow. No, he doesn't. He loves a dead woman, and I'm tired of competing with a memory. He's terrified of loving you, Marcus corrected gently. There's a difference. Before Celeste could respond, a commotion from the main house drew their attention. Through the French doors, they could see Vincent stumbling through the living room, his normally perfect appearance disheveled. His shirt was untucked, his hair wild, and even from a distance, they could see the panic in his movements. Shit, Marcus muttered, jumping to his feet. He's having an attack. Celeste had never seen Vincent vulnerable before. The man who commanded boardrooms and built empires was now gasping for air, his back pressed against the wall as he slid to the floor. His gray eyes, usually so controlled, were wide with terror. Vincent, Celeste said softly, approaching him, the way she would a wounded animal. Look at me. You're safe. Can't breathe, he gasped, his hands clawing at his collar. Emma, I couldn't save her. Without thinking, Celeste dropped to her knees beside him, taking his face in her hands. His skin was clammy and cold, but she held steady, forcing him to focus on her emerald eyes instead of whatever demons were chasing him. Breathe with me, she instructed, taking slow, deliberate breaths. In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it. You're here with me, not in the past. Gradually, Vincent's breathing began to match hers. The wild panic in his eyes faded, replaced by something raw and vulnerable that made her heart ache. When he finally spoke, his voice was broken. I dream about the accident every night. I see her face right before the impact, the trust in her eyes, the way she reached for me. His hands covered hers where they still framed his face. And then I wake up and see you, and for a split second I forget she's gone. It feels like betrayal. Loving me wouldn't dishonor her memory, Celeste whispered, her thumbs brushing away the tears he didn't seem to realize he was shedding. It would honor the woman who wanted you to be happy. Vincent's arms came around her waist, pulling her closer as he buried his face in her neck. For the first time in their marriage, he held her not out of obligation, but out of desperate need. I'm so tired of being afraid, he admitted against her skin. Then stop, she said simply. Stop being afraid and start living. Part 4. Unexpected revelations. 2 weeks after the panic attack that had changed everything between them, Celeste fainted during breakfast. One moment she was reaching for her coffee cup. The next she was waking up on the kitchen floor with Vincent's terrified face hovering above hers. Dr. James Morrison, the family physician who had delivered Vincent himself 34 years ago, arrived within the hour. The distinguished man with silver temples and kind eyes had been treating the Blackwood family for decades, and his presence provided a comforting authority that calmed everyone's nerves. When was your last cycle, Celeste? Dr. Morrison asked, gently as he took her blood pressure in the master bedroom. Celeste's mind went blank. With all the stress of adjusting to her new life, she hadn't been paying attention to such things. It's been a while. Maybe 6 or 7 weeks. Vincent, who had been pacing by the window, froze. That's not possible. We've never... Actually, Dr. Morrison said with the careful tone of someone delivering delicate news. Given the timeline, conception would have occurred around your wedding night. Sometimes stress and alcohol can affect memory formation. The silence that followed was deafening. Celeste stared at her hands, remembering fragments of that night she'd tried so hard to forget. She'd been devastated by Vincent's coldness, drinking, champagne to numb the pain, and he'd been equally intoxicated, mumbling Emma's name in his sleep. Somewhere in the haze of mutual grief and too much alcohol, they'd found comfort in each other's arms. The blood test will confirm it, Dr. Morrison continued, but based on your symptoms and the timing, I'd say congratulations are in order. Vincent's face had gone completely white. After the doctor left, he stood by the window, staring out at the gardens with the stillness of carved stone. "Vincent?" Celeste's voice was small, uncertain. "I can't be a father," he said quietly. "I don't have anything left to give." The words cut deeper than Celeste had thought possible. "So what are you suggesting?" "I don't know." He turned to face her, and she could see the war being fought behind his gray eyes. "Emma and I tried for 2 years. Every negative test was heartbreak. Every month we hoped and failed. When she got sick, one of the cruelest parts was knowing we'd never have that chance." Understanding dawned on Celeste like a cold sunrise. This pregnancy wasn't just complicated by their loveless marriage, it was tainted by the ghost of dreams that had died with Emma. "This baby isn't a consolation prize," Celeste said fiercely, her hand moving protectively to her still flat stomach. "And I won't let you treat them like one." "That's not what I meant, isn't it?" Tears she'd been holding back for months finally spilled over. "Everything in your life is filtered through her memory. Our marriage, this house, now our child. When will it be enough, Vincent? When will you stop punishing yourself and start living?" Vincent's composure cracked. "You think this is easy for me? You think I wanted to feel this way?" "I think you're scared," Celeste shot back. "Scared that if you let yourself love this baby love me, you'll somehow betray her." "But Emma is gone, Vincent. And we're here, trying to build something real from the wreckage. What if I can't love them the way they deserve?" The question came out as a whisper, laced with pain. "What if I'm too broken?" Celeste stood and walked to him, placing her hand over his heart. "Then you learn. We both learn, but you don't get to decide this baby isn't wanted before they're even born." Vincent's hand covered hers, warm and trembling. "I'm terrified I'll fail them. Fail you. Then we'll figure it out together," she said softly. "No more separate bedrooms. No more careful distance. If we're having this baby, we do it as a real married couple." For a long moment, they stood together in the fading afternoon light, two broken people trying to piece themselves back together. When Vincent finally nodded, Celeste felt hope bloom in her chest for the first time since her wedding day. "Together," he agreed, and for the first time she believed he meant it. 8 months later, Celeste's labor pains began during a thunderstorm that shook the windows of the Blackwood estate. Vincent, who had faced down hostile corporate takeovers without blinking, was reduced to a nervous wreck as he timed contractions and called Dr. Morrison. "Breathe, sweetheart," he murmured, supporting Celeste as another wave of pain washed over her. The endearment had started 3 months ago when she'd caught him talking to her belly late one night, telling their unborn daughter about the roses in the garden. The months since discovering the pregnancy had transformed their marriage from a business arrangement into something real and precious. Vincent had thrown himself into preparing for fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to his business ventures, reading every parenting book he could find and converting Emma's old studio into a nursery. More importantly, he'd begun therapy, with Dr. Morrison's recommendation, finally working through the guilt and grief that had consumed him since Emma's death. Celeste had attended several sessions with him, and together they'd learned to navigate the complicated territory of building new love while honoring old memories. "She's coming," Celeste gasped as they arrived at the private medical facility, where Dr. Morrison waited. 6 hours later, Grace Emma Blackwood entered the world with a piercing cry that seemed to shake the very foundations of Vincent's carefully constructed walls. The moment the doctor placed their daughter in his arms, something fundamental shifted in his chest. Grace had Celeste's auburn hair and what promised to be Vincent's gray eyes. But more than that, she had an immediate and devastating effect on both her parents. Vincent, who had sworn he had no love left to give, found himself drowning in fierce protectiveness and overwhelming tenderness. "She's perfect," he whispered, tears streaming down his face as he counted tiny fingers and toes. Absolutely perfect. Celeste, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband fall completely in love with their daughter. "She looks like you when you frown," she said with a tired laugh. "God help us all," Vincent replied, but his smile was pure joy. That night, as Celeste dozed and Grace slept in the bassinet beside the hospital bed, Vincent sat in the chair between them, keeping watch over his two most precious treasures. When Celeste woke in the small hours of morning, she found him still there, studying their daughter's face with wonder. "Having second thoughts?" she asked softly. Vincent looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, his eyes held no shadows, no grief, no carefully maintained distance. "I love you," he said simply. "I should have said it months ago, but I was too afraid to let myself feel it." Celeste's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "Vincent, you saved me, Celeste. You and Grace both. You took a broken man who was barely existing and taught him how to live again." He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing her wedding ring. "I know I hurt you with my distance, with my inability to let go of the past. But if you'll have me, really have me, not just the shell I've been, I promise to spend every day proving that you and Grace are my future." "We already had you," Celeste whispered, her own eyes filling with tears. "We just had to wait for you to realize it." Vincent leaned over to kiss her, soft and sweet, and full of promise. When Grace stirred in her sleep, making tiny cooing sounds, they both turned to watch her with the devotion of parents who had fought their way to happiness. 6 months later, on their first wedding anniversary, Vincent found Celeste in what had once been Emma's studio but was now Celeste's art space. She was painting while Grace napped in her portable crib nearby, sunlight streaming through the windows to illuminate the family portrait taking shape on the easel. "Is that how you see us?" Vincent asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "In the painting?" The three of them sat in the garden, Grace on Celeste's lap, while Vincent's arms encircled them both. But what struck him most was the expression Celeste had captured on his own face. Pure, uncomplicated happiness. "It's how we are," Celeste corrected, leaning back against his chest. "A family, finally?" Vincent buried his face in her hair, breathing, in the scent of vanilla and paint and the indefinable essence that was purely her. "I love you, Mrs. Blackwood," he said against her ear. "And I love our life." As if summoned by her parents' voices, Grace woke with a gurgle of contentment, her tiny fists reaching toward the sound. Celeste and Vincent moved together to lift her from the crib, and as their daughter's laughter filled the sunny room, Vincent felt the last pieces of his broken heart finally heal. Emma would always be part of his story, but Celeste and Grace were his future. And for the first time in years, that future looked bright indeed.